What up, Flow Squad? In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the inner and outer tie rods on your Toyota Tacoma. Let's get this thing started. This video was brought to you by K-Flow's Crib, your #1 resource for Tacoma DIY projects. Make sure you smash that subscribe button so you're up to date with my latest video releases. In this video, we're going to be replacing the inner and outer tie rods on the passenger side of your Toyota Tacoma. So when you do the driver side, it's the exact mirror image of what you do with the passenger side. Before we get started, I just want to let you all know that November is Men's Health Issues Awareness Month. And for the month of November, I will be donating my Google AdSense revenue towards cancer research as well as men's health issues awareness. And on top of that, November is also known for Movember, where all the guys grow out their facial hair so that it increases awareness for men's health issues. I don't usually grow facial hair because people say that I start looking like Antonio Banderas. And I don't want to drop any more panties. Anyways, let's get to the truck.
So the first thing we do is jack up the truck and put her on jack stands. And remove the front wheels. We remove the cotter pin on the outer tie rod using wire cutters and the needle nose pliers. Now we can brush off the corrosion with a wire brush and hit that castle nut with PB Blaster. We can use a 19mm socket to remove that castle nut completely. We take a suspension fork and jam that in between the tie rod and steering knuckle to separate that ball joint. This fork set can be rented for free at your local auto parts store. Now we can use a pin punch and a hammer to drive out that tie rod completely. Turn the steering knuckle outwards as far as we can so that we have plenty of working space. We also turn the steering wheel all the way to the right. We can now remove the boot clamps protecting the inner tie rod ends. We use needle nose pliers to remove the smaller boot clamp, and we use a breaker bar and a hammer to break off the opposite end. We should then be able to pull off that whole boot. This is a locking washer on the inner tie rod. We hammer out the locking washer on both sides using the curved end of the breaker bar. Then we can use a pipe clamp to grab onto the inner tie rod and break it loose. We should now be able to completely remove it by hand. At this point, we can take a rag and clean up as much of that steering rack as possible. We take our new inner tie rod and install a new locking washer, as well as apply some blue Loctite onto the threads. We install the tie rod onto the steering rack and snug tight that inner tie rod onto the steering rack using a pipe wrench. Use a hammer to bend back that locking washer. For the upper side of that locking washer, I just rotated the steering wheel more towards the left so I can use a pry bar to fold it over from the top. We can now install a brand new boot and use high strength zip ties to secure the boot onto the inner tie rod. We can also turn the steering wheel further to the left to secure the inner tie rod of the boot onto the steering rack with more zip ties. Now let's take our outer tie rods. These are the greasable ones made by Moog. Let's make sure we install the Zerk fitting and snug it down with a 10mm wrench. We also turn the steering wheel all the way to the right and prepare the steering knuckle by wiping off the excess debris and the oil on that mounting surface. We can also apply a bit of wheel bearing grease on those surfaces as well. Now let's thread in the outer tie rod to the inner one.
Use a tape measure and measure the overall length of the old tie rod assembly, starting from the flat side of the inner tie rod all the way to the end of the outer tie rod. You want to make sure that this measurement matches the new measurement of your new assembly. and this way it keeps your alignment somewhat consistent. But you will need to do a realignment on your truck, so make sure you check out my wheel alignment video at home, and that will be linked in the description below as well.
Now we can install the tie rod onto the steering knuckle using a Newcastle nut from the set, and this one is 21 millimeters, torqued down to 41 foot-pounds. Now let's install a new cotter pin and lock it in place using needle nose pliers. We can now tighten down that jam nut using a 24 millimeter wrench. Finally, we can grease up that ball joint with a grease gun and wipe off any excess grease from that zerk fitting. Let's install the front wheel and lugs and torque the lugs down to 85 foot-pounds.
So that's pretty much it for this installation, guys. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward and it's a pretty easy job, just like your mom. I do prefer these greasable ball joints because it does two major things to increase longevity and reduce wear. Number one, the new grease pushes out any debris that does build up in between the ball joint. And number two, it keeps the ball joint freshly lubricated. And who doesn't like fresh lubrication? Am I right?
I like where this is going. Giggity, giggity, giggity.
So that's pretty much it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please consider supporting my channel by becoming a Patreon patron. All the details can be found at patreon.kflow-crib.com. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button as well. And until next time, peace out.